Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, which is the latest in a series of events held by the IHI office to demonstrate the impact of our projects. My name is Colin Carroll, and I am a scientific project manager at IHI, and I focus on projects in digital health space, but I also have responsibilities at IHI for the participation of SMEs. So in this particular webinar, we're going to focus on some of the SMEs that have been working on health data management and health IT in IMI projects. And I'm delighted to be joined by three excellent speakers from three of these SMEs. Before I introduce them, however, I'll just get a few notes out of the way and a few housekeeping issues. First of all, you will have noticed that we are no longer IMI, the Innovative Medicine Initiative. We are actually IHI, the Innovative Health Initiative. And the main differences between IMI and IHI are mostly in terms of scope. So we are now charged with tackling the whole of the healthcare continuum, not just pharmaceutical research. Our industry stakeholders have also expanded and now include imaging companies, digital health, diagnostics, medtech, and so on. And finally, we are also even more interested now in how the impacts of our projects, the outputs of our projects, kind of a long-term impact, especially on patients. If you're interested to find out more about IHI, please do look at our website. So then a few housekeeping matters. Slides seem to be moving, I'm afraid, but the housekeeping matters. So first of all, you, the audience, are in what we call listen-only mode. This means that your microphones are muted and they'll stay muted throughout the webinar. However, we do want this session to be interactive, and we therefore invite you to ask questions through the chat function. And you can ask these at any time throughout the webinar, and we will try to address them at the appropriate moment during our discussions. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the IHI website following the webinar. So if you do miss something, don't worry, you can always look at the recording later on. And finally, if this webinar does whet your appetite and you want to find out more about IHI, and especially the calls that we will launch later this year, again, please go to our website. And very importantly, please subscribe to our newsletter, where you will get news on the latest projects and latest project news, and also on the upcoming calls. So this slide here, where you can see the speakers, I'm going to move to focusing on the webinar today, which, as I said, we're going to talk about the impacts that IHI funding has had on SMEs. And before I just introduce the speakers themselves, I just want to say why SMEs are important to us in IHI. There's a multitude of reasons, I guess, but I think the most important ones are probably, first of all, that SMEs, as we're going to find out, bring their own unique expertise to a project. So they have specialized expertise which can really add value to the project and make sure that the outputs are what we want to have. But also, very, very importantly, they have SMEs normally have quite a strong business mindset. And when we're thinking about the long-term impact of IMI projects, having organizations in a project that start thinking about the long-term viability of the outputs after the funding period is end is very important for us. And then perhaps at a higher level, and this applies for European funding in general, I think we recognize that SMEs are the bedrock of the European economy, and therefore by supporting the growth of SMEs, we can support the European economy and create jobs, etc., and so on. So that's quite important too. Okay, so let's get going, and I'll briefly introduce our three speakers. They're going to give a fuller introduction a little bit later, so we'll just say hello for now. So first of all, maybe I'll ask Julia Kurps from the Hive to say hello. Hi, Julia.
Hello.
Great to see you. Next, Andreas Kramer from ITTM in Luxembourg. Andreas, good to see you. And finally, Mathieu Gaultier from OKIN, which is in Paris. So hi, Mathieu.
Hello, everyone.
Great. Okay, so we'll start with a brief introduction, as I said, from each of the speakers to their organization and how they first got involved in IMI. And I'll ask Julia to go first. So Julia, please.
Thanks, Com, and thanks everybody for joining, and thanks for the opportunity here to tell a little bit about myself and the company I work for, and also, how we participate in IMI projects and how that helped us. So if we go to the next slide, there's a little bit of introduction about myself. So I have a background in chemistry, actually. Also did some courses in pharmacology, and then went into more neuroscience, where I also did my PhD at the University of Amsterdam. and then decided I wanted to make a switch from academia more to industry, to also see, how can I apply the research that I'm really passionate about really more in a, daily practice. And so in my current role, I'm a team lead for the real world data team at the Hive. So that means I'm just trying to help my team to find challenging projects where we can learn a lot, where we can have an impact and also some purpose. That's really important for the people that I work with. I'm also trying to make a lot of connections between different stakeholders from different projects, and just make sure that the operations run smoothly and that everything goes according to plan. And if we go to the next slide, you can read what the mission of the Hive is, which is actually enabling open science. And we try to do that with two different streams. One of them is providing support and services on the tools, so open source solutions that we provide services for. And on the other hand, really looking at the data, making sure we help our customers and our partners to verify the data, so that there's reuse of data for all relevant use cases, and no data is just going into a drawer somewhere in a an office. On the next slide, you will see a little bit about the company. So we've started in 2012, when our 10th year now, about 40 employees at the moment, and we work with quite a broad range of customers. Also, a lot of the people that we know from the IMI projects. So we work with pharma, but also CROs, academia, hospitals, research organizations, the full bandwidth. And I think what's important here, and also why I think can hopefully contribute to this discussion, is that we've been involved in more than 15 pre-competitive initiatives until now. Many of them Horizon 2020, but also FP7, and so a lot of them IMI 1 and 2. And when we go to the next slide, you just see a little bit of an overview of the company. So we're quite multidisciplinary. We work with solution architects, software engineers, data engineers, but also business analysts, project managers, team managers. And on the next slide, you will see how we get started with IMI, because I had to do a little bit of digging up, because I think the Hive actually started with IMI projects before I joined the company, because it was already in the second year of the company, 2013, I think, when we started in the IMI EMAF project. So EMAF stands for the European Medical Information Framework. There we were just a really small team, still a really small company. We just had, a couple of customers, but they suggested us to be part of this project, and so we went for this, because I think what we had at this time was really a small team, but still quite a good network, and also a nice vision for what we want to do with biomedical data. And I think that was really something that was useful for the project. We also brought in what we were best at the time, data curation and technical expertise, and that's also something where we're still building on in the projects that we're working on now. And I think on the next slide is just the portfolio, where you see these are some of the tools that we're working with. And in my team, we're really focusing on the first two, the Odyssey and Radarbase, which are also some of the products that we really highly active in. A lot of IMI projects to support those tools. But I will also come back to that later in the conversation. And then at the end, there's just a summary of what we do. And I'm looking forward to the conversation, and hopefully we can share some insights here, and giving the floor to the next speaker here.
Thank you, Julia. That was great. I'm particularly interested in, you mentioned open science, and for me, it's some area of focus for me. I'm very interested in how you can build a business based on open science, open source solutions, and so on. So I guess we'll touch on that a little bit later on. But maybe I'll hand over next to Andreas, who will talk about ITTM.
Thanks, Colm, and thanks everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. ITTM is, like you said, also an SME. Actually, we are from Luxembourg, and Luxembourg SME. And in one phrase, what we are trying to do is really to make data more actionable, or actionable in the first case. And maybe, like Julia as well, a couple of words to myself. Next slide, please. From background, I'm a mixed bag, having studied molecular biology, genetics, virology in Cologne some years ago. that's basically brought me to some extent into pharma industry. So I have a bit more, not only a bit, I'm not so young anymore, so I have a bit of background in pharma, a couple of 10 years clinical research actually at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam. And that got Siemens interested in Austria, and all of that culminated in the wish really to drive data management better. So with colleagues from the Luxembourg Center of System Biomedicine, we the managing director. Now, there's a bit of a disclaimer because I'm also a mixed bag in terms of where I'm always in. I'm also in the board of directors of Vito Transmat. We come to this a bit later. I'm a member of the Industry Advisory Committee of Elixirs. Most of you might know that. And I'm actually a member of the Society of Medical Informatics and Biometry and Epidemiology in Germany. A very important thing for me is standardization, and therefore I'm for Luxembourg working on these ISOs which are listed here. I'm frequently being review and expert for the European Commission, EORCs and others. So recently also for ethical aspects. And all of that is culminating in basically what ITTM is or was in the beginning and is now. If I get the next slide, please. So we started in 2015 our journey, actually as an outcome, if you like, as a request from an IMI project at that time called eTrix. And there was a big need for data management, data curation. Julia also just mentioned it. And this is really where ITTM started at the very beginning, doing purely work for pharma, for preclinical, clinical studies from the very beginning, I have to say, in the context of IMI projects. And I'm really happy about that. And some of the projects which are listed here are also mentioned later. 3 years ago, we were also one of the very first SMEs selected for being even certified SMEs in the context of OMO. And as you can see from this journey, we added roughly 2019, 2020, another aspect, not only focusing on the pharma side of the world, but also on the more healthcare side, and added this aspect here called digital health services. And also there, we are putting a lot of efforts and colleagues in there. So if you like, you see it on the slide, data management, curation services, that's where we started with Transmat, with the Odyssey, with our common data models and everything around that. And more we are going into this digital healthcare services, where we are also talking real world data, patient reported outcome measures, etc. And ITTM is certainly one of the SMEs we are really using and working together with IMI and other H2020 grants. And we have so far 8 grants. And in Luxembourg, we got quite a nice position and positioned ourselves in that field. And for us, working in this public-private partnerships is really important. So I stop here for a moment, but more later, I promise. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Andreas. A few things there I think we'll pick up on later. I think you and Julia both mentioned OMOP, and I think that's something we'll touch on afterwards. But let's hand over to Mathieu now, who'll talk about how OKIN first got introduced to IMI.
Okay, so my name is Mathieu Galtier. I'm the Chief Product Officer at OKIN, and I'm also the project coordinator at the IMI project called Melody. So a bit of my background, I've got an academic background, a PhD in machine learning, and then I worked in the field of startups, and I've done a few grants, in my different jobs, right from writing them to executing them. So at OKIN, our mission is to discover better drugs for every patient. And basically, we are an AI company. So we are approximately 150 people, data scientists, software engineers, and medical experts. And we are a VC-funded company with north of 200 million of investment, and we are rapidly growing. So as opposed to the 2 other companies that are going to present today, we do not have so many IMI or Horizon Europe projects. We essentially started with Melody and are involved in a few others, but not as much, I would say. So in the next slide, I'm going to explain a little bit what is it that OKIN is doing. So we have 3 different axes. The first one is federated patient data access. So it is how we access and manipulate data of different partners, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, so that we can train machine learning models or execute algorithms on them. This is what we call federated learning. I'm going to talk about that today. The second axis is a multimodal determination of patient subtypes. So here, using data science and raw data, we are going to categorize patients to figure out which drugs work on which patient. And finally, when we have built these models, we focus on model deployment into integrable solutions, basically how to ship our machine learning models in the medical workflows of our customers. So today I'm going to talk mainly about federated learning, and because it is the topic of the IMI project Melody. So in the next slide, the question is, what is federated learning? So this is going to be very brief, but just so that we are on the same page. Federated learning is a methodology to train state-of-the-art machine learning models on distributed data sets. So for some reasons, some actors, competitors, partners cannot share the data because they are competitive, because they are regulated or too sensitive, and they want to keep their data in-house. So together with the community, we've devised a technology called federated learning, which is going to leave the data in behind the firewall of all the different participants. And as you see on the small video here, the models travel from an averaging server to the data centers. They are trained locally in the data centers and then come back. So what's good with this approach is that we can train state-of-the-art models on a lot of data without compromising data safety. So that's it for federated learning. I hope you have an understanding of this. Now I'm going to talk about the IMI project Melody, where we got involved in the next slide. And so, IMI Melody is a 3 years project which is about to end, and it's about deploying federated learning on the field of drug discovery, so small molecules, and especially in the early steps of the pipeline. So we work with 10 pharmaceutical companies, and we build this federated learning approach, and the goal is to train these common models, but keep privacy of the data because the pharma do not want to share their own data. Okay, so now to explain and to try to give you an idea how we got involved there, we were building this federated learning technology for patient data, mainly with different hospitals in the first time. And then we saw that there was a call from the IMI on something which was very similar, the application of federated learning to drug discovery. Although we didn't know much about drug discovery, we made some calls, tried to create a consortium, and in a very short time, we built up this consortium that's applied to the grants. And I think we can say that we were the underdogs. So a lot of SMEs in our consortium, led by an SME and by people who had not so much experience in the IMI overall, but we could surround ourselves with not only the pharma, but also other academic partners, which helped us make a good application. And we, being the underdog, we had to grow to grow the different ladder of trust with the pharma, which we did through the project, and we are now in a comfortable position at the end of the project. But I'm going to talk a bit about that further later. Thanks everyone, and see you later.
Great, thank you, Mathieu. So I think I'll ask everyone else to turn on the cameras, and we'll have a first discussion where I want to focus mostly on how you first got involved in IMI and perhaps some of the immediate learnings from that. And I think everyone's touched on this already. Maybe I'll go to Mathieu first of all, if that's okay, because you've only just spoken, but you're perhaps a little bit different from the other two. Whereas you already had a reasonably well-established business and you saw an opportunity. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Were you scouting for these things? Did you know about IMI before? Did you know about the importance of the public-private partnership?
So we didn't know much about IMI, but we knew it existed. We were scouting for Horizon 2020 at the time goals, so that we could build. Our technology is fundamentally collaborative. So the collaborative projects are well adapted to what we are doing. And so we were looking at this field, but what was really striking when we got to learn this IMI initiative, is that it was really well aligned with what we were doing. That I mean, to some extent, I could have written some part of the code text, and so it was mind blowing. And we decided that there was, I mean, no, even if we didn't have a lot of background, it was so close that we should apply. From technological perspective, we were in the early days, so our platform just got the first proof of concept, I would say, with some hospitals, and it was not so good. So it was really a way for us to make a step forward. Honestly, the way we learned about IMI is because someone sent us the call text saying, is this exactly what you are doing, guys? And the answer was yes. And then we got on and started and learned with the different webinars, the different contacts that we have had, from nothing to being the coordinator of a project. It was a wild ride.
Great. Thanks, Mathieu. Maybe some of the similar question to the others, perhaps for Andreas. First of all, you mentioned your ITTM came as kind of a spin-off nearly from one of our early projects called Etrix. And I'm just wondering, Etrix, obviously, like all other IMI projects, is a public-private partnership. So you got private organizations, public. Did having those relationships already established help you in your spin-off, help you to be successful quite early on? I think you're on mute at the moment.
I'm muted. Sorry, that was hitting on the wrong spot. Well, it's a yes and a no to some extent, because obviously, knowing that there is a certain need, this makes it easy to really focus on the service, and ITTM as a service organization to really make this helpful for all involved parties. So in that sense, absolutely. And it also helped very much to drive towards an organization which is being professional in a way, saying, you don't have to explain what is a timeline, what is a milestone, how do things have to organize in terms of processes. Many of us are coming actually, or do have a background in pharma industry. So also here, the thinking, the modus operandi, if you like, is being in our DNA as well. So it was very easy to talk to each other and really also understand. And sometimes still it's this barrier of saying, okay, I'm a researcher in a lab and I'm focusing on my research, or I'm a researcher in a lab and I have a goal which has to be reached in a certain amount of time, in a certain amount of resources, etc. So that shifting, that focusing, that pragmatism, if I'm allowed to say it, that certainly is something which we were driven towards, but I wouldn't say this was only coming to us because of the connection. We had that in ourselves as well. But yes, understanding each other and being a driven SME, not only for research, but really bringing it into action, that makes a difference. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Julia, I guess for you, this was perhaps before your time in the Hive when you said a customer referred you to the EMIF project. But would you be able to speak a little bit about how that experience helped the organization grow from the first project? And I know some of the activities you're doing at the moment are based on outputs of that particular project.
Yeah, that's true. So as I said, we were, people came to us and said, yeah, they want to be part of this because we think you have the right expertise and you could help here. And I think what we've learned from there is just building up on this. So I think what we see now in the recent years, that also based on the efforts that you do in one project, people learn how you work, they trust you, and they come back. So whenever there's a new project where people are looking for an IT partner with a certain sort of expertise, then they come to us and ask us if we want to join. And I think this is also something that helped us a lot by just working with more and more partners. You build trust, you build a network, and then people also refer you to their colleagues, for example, who are not part of a certain project. But if it's just a solution that you can offer or some expertise or some skill sets, then people will just come back to you and help you grow your company and your skill set. And I think this is exactly what happened to us.
Great. Okay, we've had a question in the chat and a question we had earlier, or perhaps on some of the barriers or the perceived barriers to participation in projects from an SME point of view. I know we quite often hear about SMEs be concerned about their IP when they go into a big partnership with large companies and academics and others. They're concerned about that. And the other question was, maybe an SME is relatively a small organization and perhaps there's some administrative overhead getting involved in a big European project. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about how you felt about these barriers before you joined projects and how you've addressed them perhaps through the project lifetime.
Maybe feedback on our side. So IP was not really a big issue because the pharma and the context was very well structured already. and we had defined very clear zones, areas of IPs which were fine. So to some extent, maybe it was a bit scary at the beginning, but not that much. We were with, rational people that were looking for the best of the project. I think what was scary is that there are not so many, in our situation, not so many startups who coordinate such consortia. We were told a massive overhead in terms of organization and things like this. At the same time, I don't think a startup should refrain from doing mistakes, even when someone tells them that it is a mistake. So we went straight in, and it was a very good idea. And I would recommend any startup to engage in such activity, because it's, as we'll see later, it's very structuring for the company. And yes, there is an overhead, but at the same time, there is funding to have someone taking care of this overhead. So I don't see this as a major difficulty. From my perspective, it's mainly an image situation, branding from the IMI IHI. Do the startup know that they can participate to this and even lead such initiatives? This I'm not sure. And yeah,
it's good feedback for us. We have to highlight the fact that yes, SME startups are welcome to coordinate. Andreas, Julia, would you like to speak on this?
I can subscribe to it. Sorry, Julia, go first. Sorry for that.
Yeah, no, I can definitely comment to the question of the fear of the overhead. That's definitely something that's time consuming for SMEs, but as Mathieu said, it really helps you structuring also, because then you know which meetings are the important ones, with whom do you have to talk, and how do you structure and organize your work. Because normally the SMEs are most of the time like the smaller parties, right? So there's just one person or two persons that have to have a couple of different roles in such a consortium. And yeah, you really learn on the way. So it's a lot of insights that you get on your own way of working, and also on how you work with other people, and how you get really efficient and make sure that you get the right questions out at the right time.
And Andreas, I know you're a participant in many of our projects, so hopefully you've solved this problem. So let's hear from you.
Now I can subscribe to both of Mathieu and Julia. One hand, on the IP side, I also would say it's not a scary thing at all. It's clear, structured, what is background, how you deal with this. And also thinking open source data, open data, there is less the problem of it's me, yes, I know venture capital and so on might like patterns, but it's rather what you do with it than having certain things. But on the other side also, what Julia said, you need to have a certain level of structure, and I think Mathieu mentioned this as well. And also thinking about the financial, how you put it in, what are the guidelines, what do you have to do in the reporting period, etc., how that is being structured. There's a lot of support being given. Some people are not being actually aware of from the Commission and from IHI or IMI in the past. And I think this is also here helping the newcomers, the SMEs, to further structure themselves in a good way. So if you're open, if you're reaching out, there is a lot you can learn, and where you get a red line and you're not left alone. And being in multiples of them, again, it's very useful also for us, and Julia said it correct, this building trust, that there is a party you can discuss on eye level, and Mathieu said it as well, even being an SME, that doesn't mean you are not the professional in this team. You are really from another organization type, but in terms of playing a role in a public-private partnership, this is really beneficial for all. And again, there is a lot of support, and I think in that environment of an IMI or IHI in the future, this is really good, growing with these organizations.
Great, thanks, Andreas. And we've had another couple of questions in the chat, but I'll suggest we park those until after the next round of presentations, which we'll go to now. So this time I've asked the speakers to maybe tell us a little bit about how the funding has had an impact on their SME and how it allowed them to grow and develop further. And I'll ask Julia again to go first. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So yeah, I think if we can go to the next slide, we can directly jump into what I think are the main advantages for an SME to join such a project. And I think that falls into two categories. One of them is, or the first one is the collaboration, networking, visibility. I think something that we already touched slightly in the conversation that we have. And the second one is really also the development and the shaping of the products and services that you can offer as a company. And moving on to the next slide, there's a little bit more details in that. And so what I think most important aspects is, for example, that you address a real problem. So this is something that has been identified by society, by a lot of stakeholders from different backgrounds. They say, okay, this is a project that needs to be addressed. And so I think what's always nice is that you work then together with a consortium, so you have a broad range of expertise, of knowledge, and also there's a lot of way of innovative thinking, because I think because of the setup of the project, there's also not so much risk involved, because everybody's working to a common goal, and there's ways to try out things and to really learn. And what's also nice about these collaborations in those IMI or IHI projects is really the inspiring collaboration, because especially in our company, we have a lot of young people that want to have a purpose and really make an impact and really help, for example, patients. So I think this is something that really helps also for shaping the company and for having a good way of working there. You also learn a lot because, as I said, broad range of stakeholders. You work with clinical experts, you work with data experts, with IT experts. You can learn a lot and improve yourself. And also, I think really looking at the business aspect, and as an SME, we always have to sell projects, for example, and work on also commercial turnover. This really helps us to build trust, which we have explained before, but also that we really understand what are the trends in industry, what are they looking for, what are their needs, and how can we better understand them. And at the end of the day, of course, it also helps us to generate leads and to gain new customers by just building up on this network and the visibility. Because also there's a lot of publicity around IMI and IHI projects. There's a lot of reach out also from the organization itself, and that always helps us to also be able to show what we can offer to our partners and our customers. And if we go to the next slide, I want to dive deeper into the product and the service development a little bit more, because what I explained before is that there's a real world need. So it's really that the solution that you're building solves a problem that really exists. So there's always a range of customers or partners that want to work with you. And what I think is really important here is that you have this direct access also to the key users and the relevant stakeholders. So you really can talk to the people that want to work with their solution, that want to run studies. You can really understand what are the pain points, what are the bottlenecks, what aspects really need to be addressed in order to help them work and contribute to science. And I think this is something that's really valuable also when you build a product and if you offer services. And of course, you can also try out things. So there's a really quick turnaround. So you can build a lot of pilots, you try them out, you get direct feedback, and you can improve what you offer. And you also have time and room in this project to build the tools and the services and processes, so that you really know, okay, what works for the sort of customer or key user of my solution, and you can really make sure that you offer the best for your partners. And if you move to the next slide, I want to go into one of the products that we actually built as part of the IMI projects, which is called Radarbase, which is a platform for remote monitoring of study participants. And so that was funded and built under IMI Radar CNS and IMI Radar ID, both projects that wanted to focus on how can we best explore the potential of wearable and sensor data to lower the burden for patients, but also for pharmaceutical companies that want to bring their drugs to the market, because we know all those studies, they're always really expensive. So you want to just collect the data from participants at home. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see how we built a platform in the meantime. So there's just a really nice way to collect data, either passively or actively. Also something that I think Andreas also mentioned about the digital health services, so that you want to really collect the patient-reported outcomes. And then we store them in the platform and visualize the data, and also make sure that the participants get feedback, but also the clinicians can actually act on what they see in the data that comes in. When you move on to the next slide, you see a little bit the timeline. So as I said, we started in 2016 just with design and development, and then already 1 year later we could do the first study, because we're so close to the people that want to run the study, but we're also in direct contact with the patients, so they can provide feedback of what data they want to share, how they want to share it, how often they want to receive notifications, all of those aspects that you only get if you're directly working with the people that want to use your solution. And in 2018, then the platform was launched under an open source license, so also available to other parties. In 2019, we've started to build up on what we have done before in the RadarAD project. So it's just focusing on other disease areas, but also making sure that we can improve the platform and we can improve scalability. And from there on, we just have seen the platform being adopted by a lot of academic organizations, but also more commercial parties like CROs, for example. And this year we had the first annual meeting, or the first annual symposium, to really make sure that the community is growing, that there are more partners using the platform, more partners contributing to the community, and really continue the success story. If you go a little bit to the next slide, you see the impact and the growth that has been happened in the last years. So we have already more than 45 case studies. The platform is used in a lot of studies with different disease areas, because it's device and disease agnostic, with almost 50,000 study participants from which we collect data. And we've integrated the platform with more than 10 devices and apps to really collect data from sensors and from wearables that can be used in the clinical studies. And at the end, I just want to show what we are doing as Hive. So as I said, the platform is available under an open source license, so freely available for everybody. But people come to us because we have built the platform, so we have a lot of expertise around that. And then we just shaped our services around what we've learned in the project. So we, for example, can offer services now for hosting and maintenance, or we help our partners to deploy and configure the platform for themselves. We build new features, we train people, we provide knowledge transfer. And so these are all services that we could really shape by just being part of the IMI projects and working really closely together with the study participants, the patients, and also the researchers. And so since the platform has been launched in 2018, we have worked at more than 25% projects for academic organizations and consortia, and also more than 50 projects for CROs and for the pharmaceutical industry. So I think this is one of the success stories that really shows you, as an SME, you can really build something in such a project and really also continue outside the project to grow and to build revenue around those. And that's what I wanted to share. I think if there's questions, please feel free to ask, and I will explain more what we did there.
Great, thanks, Julia, especially for highlighting Radarbase, which is one of the key outputs of some of our projects. So it's great to see that you've managed to take it forward as part of your company. And indeed, there's a question on this in the chat, which I think we'll come to after the other presentation. So I'll hand over now to Andreas for the next one.
Okay, as promised, here a couple of slides on the on what we are doing, or what is the impact of IMI on us as an SME. If I can have the next slide. I wanted to do also maybe a bit what is being felt like a step back, but Julia showed nicely what you can do if data are being collected in the right way. But what really means data management or data curation? You know, why do we need this? And it's a busy slide on one hand, but it also shows you, I hope, why even today data management, data curation is still needed. And on the left side, what you see is basically the outcome of the same assay being done in 3 different labs. And wherever you see something in red, you have to change, you have to transform, because the assay might have an SOP but the SOPs of the labs not necessarily are being harmonized. So even if you think you have the same assay, it doesn't mean you get numbers and you can just compare them by a snap of a finger in a fraction second. Why is that? Well, on the top right, what you see is, as an example, even if the measurement is weight loss of a patient, initially that might sound very easy, but in the end of the day, it has a couple of inherited points you have to assume or you have to know, which makes it in the end actually not so clear, which means when is the patient measured first and then second in order to do this weight loss, because you have a range. Is it before the treatment starts? Is it when the treatment ends? Is it, when you see the patient first, is it being calculated or being measured in grams, kilograms, pound, percentages? All of that and many, many more things you will find in the end of the day in clinical or preclinical data in studies, but also in the real world side, because one thing inherited is not really there, and this is a standardization of measurements or of units. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this was the major reason why ITTM was founded. And actually, as a second outcome of ETRICS, the IMI I mentioned before, some of the organizations from that time, the SMEs from that time, built together a loose network, the ETRICS Data Science Network, which also, and you see this today as well, one SME alone might only do a certain, or is being capable of serving a certain volume. But if you are bringing multiple SMEs together or partners together, you might actually provide a much better service and solution to your customers, to your partners. And also EDSN is in that sense a good example where joining up 2 or 3 parties, you are really able to serve customers and project partners much better. So as said, this is where we are coming from. And if I can get the next slide also to really explain what are the services. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. What are the services really making most sense? Again, it's a busy slide on one. Sorry, that was one too fast, my mistake. What are we doing when we are talking about data management? Now, in the recent years, there is this federated aspect of data management coming more and more into the environment. Still, we do have central databases, central systems, I2B2, Transmat, to mention that, but it's not the only one. So having these systems hosted, hosting the Odyssey software stack, also Julia mentioned Eden before, they are really important, and you do need colleagues always who are capable of installing, capable of running the maintenance. Maybe an organization doesn't want to do this themselves because it's not core value or core activity, and then it's being outsourced. And if that is coming into place, then typically also you have to understand, and this is on the top right and the figures hidden, you have to understand the processes within the organizations. And that again sounds trivial, but it's not. Every organization has a kind of red line, but they are individual flavors of same things. So understanding how data flows, how actually the user and access is being in organizations, if it's a pharmaceutical industry partner or if it's basically a hospital or whoever, that's very important to understand, and making sure that the right data is coming to the right spot. So what is data sharing support there? Process optimization I mentioned, but again, also coming back, cleansing and cleaning up of preclinical, clinical data. A lot of times when we are doing data mapping and we figure out at the end of running the ETL there's a problem, well, obviously the mapping can be not optimal, but many times we figure out actually in the database there is a value, there is a syntax which should not be there because a commata was mistakenly put where a decimal point should be, and all these kind of small little things where we help our customers to get over it. So ETL design, I mentioned it this weekend, and I know that the Hive came there from there as well. This is something really to help people doing a proper data management towards fair systems, so findable, accessible, identifiable, and reusable. And not to forget training of people. And again, here I would like to mention Odyssey and Eden. I will come to that in the next slide as well. But training of people, you know, this is not what you're necessarily getting in your curriculum if you're a computational biologist, bioinformatician, or whatever. These people are dealing most of the time with cleaning up of data, but you know, this is being on the job. So on the job training, support for workforce, that's something where also SMEs can play a big role in these contexts of proper data management in the translational medicine market. If I can, yeah, thank you. Again, there are these two big, I call them areas, more central data, you know, I2B2 or transmit, and more on the federated side, but even there you can think of a central place. And I put in here the labels of the IMI project ITTM is being honored to be part of. And in many of them, we are also playing a role in the data management. EU Pearl has an asterisk because we are in the moment in Ascendo writing basically or signing of the last contracts to be involved there as well. And I would like also to stress here a little bit the Optima IMI, because there with OKIN, it's our pleasure to work together. As I mentioned already, Eden is the one where the Hive is very heavily involved in, and Eden Pioneer. These are really projects where this on-mopping of data, if I'm allowed, so making data available in a federated system. You know, no data is leaving, but you still can collaborate with your colleagues. That context, this aspect is heavily driven, and this is really, really great. As mentioned already, we were one of the very first Eden certified SMEs some years ago. If I can get the penultimate slide, please. This is just a bit summarizing why and what for us is the biggest impact in IMIs, and a lot of that was mentioned and, you know, or forgotten here on that slide. So gaining visibility and reputation, showing what we are doing. You know, we are not just saying we can do it, but we are also displaying that we are putting things into action and really get things done. What also helps in that sense, obviously, having a multi-year contract, you know, and therefore also multi-year financial support by IMI, by IHI, is an important aspect. Nevertheless, this is fee for service. It's not something where you can put margins it's really, you get your reimbursement of the activities of the personnel you're needing. And that also means that, and we talked about this, it's really a call for proper financial controlling, proper financial setup. You know, there's pre-financing, there's financing at the end of the day, and then you really have to bring this together. So it really makes an SME even more professional than it might be before. It is, and I think this was mentioned beforehand as well, a huge facilitator for subsequent B2B contracts. And it's certainly something we should not forget. It's an interesting stimulating collaboration environment. And as Julia already, and I'm pretty sure we will hear about that more, there are more projects coming out of it. If it's a product at the end of the day, or an idea for the next great collaboration, it is something to grow, not only on the business side, but also on the research and on the intellectual side. So for me, that's not a great impact. And on the last slide, obviously, I'm not doing this alone, and also ITTM is growing over time. These are the pictures of the people we have today, and I'm really proud that this is a really international group with some 7, 8 different countries, or representatives from different countries. Luckily, we got a balance as well between genders, and I'm really, really proud of this team, and I'm really happy looking towards the future, gaining and growing further. And with this, I stop for the second. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andreas. Great presentation, and I especially appreciate the fact you focused quite a bit on the actual data management itself, because IMI projects produce an awful lot of data, and it's, therefore the data from the project itself is a result by itself. So it's great to have the data not just available to the consortium to do their studies, but afterwards, after the funding finishes, to have this available. And I think that's where an SME like yours can really fit in and have that impact that we want. And I think we'll touch on some of the other aspects you mentioned as well, especially in terms of training, I think essential, and the federation, and that's, as you say, it's becoming more and more important. But before we have the discussion, let's ask Matthew to give his presentation on the impact. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the impact of Melody on OKIN. So before going in the details, I think we can fairly say that the impact has been quite massive. So OKIN started, when Melody started, we were about 30, now we are 150, and approximately 30 people at OKIN have been involved in Melody at different levels and stages. And everyone in OKIN knows about Melody, how important it is, and the project has a quite good reputation internally, although everyone knows that it means a lot of work and that it's requiring. Okay, so let's go into a bit more the different details. So I've prepared 3 different axes. In the next slide, you see the first one. So what is it that we got with Melody? And I think that's the most important one. We got a proof point. So federated learning is a new technology. It's a consortium technology. There is a lot of hype around it, but no one really uses it in real life scenarios. There starts to be some experiments and proof points here and there, but none of them has been done at this scale with 10 different institutions on this kind of data and this extremely secure scenario that we are considering. So Melody is for us a proof point that what we are building works and has value. And this is absolutely crucial for us. Without this kind of proof point, we cannot prove and we cannot move forward. So in the first year of the project, as you can see on the right, we've been able to show that the technology works. We are able to perform this federated learning at scale between 10 pharma companies. The second year, we have shown that there is improvement of the predictive models and that the technology and the science work. Well, it can still be improved, and we are working in the third year right now to get the final results of the project. So in a word, the proof point is the first thing that we need from Melody. The second one is more a question of culture. So we are a startup, young startup, growing very quickly. We work with academics. Some of us are also academics in previous lives, and we work with pharma companies. And the cultures of these 3 different groups are very different. And working together is really a skill. It's not granted that it will work from the beginning. And so what we learned a lot is efficient collaboration with external stakeholders, and in particular pharma stakeholders and more generally with large companies. So the collaboration that we have set up is actually very tight. So I meet my colleagues from Melody daily, and there are many different tracks of collaboration, and we are a very tight-knit consortium. And so this has created a very strong Melody team spirit, which has been very good to help everyone get to know the strengths and also the weaknesses of the cultures of the other organizations. But overall, this has been very good for us, making us go to the next step in terms of organization pipeline, workflow, responsibility, and decision making as a whole. So the second point, no, please go on the previous slide. Thanks for anticipating, but this was not it. I think because this last point, I think is very, very important for us. Melody is for us a network of potential customers. So maybe it's a bit different from other IMI projects. In Melody, we build the technology inside the project, which we then intend to sell to the pharma which are inside the project. So we have our customers with us when we develop and work on the technology. So this is very good for us, not only because we have already business relationship with 10 of these pharma companies with contractual engagements, the people, I mean, there are already some tracks of work together, but most importantly, we know the people, and I can call the 10 pharma companies, I now know who to call and to have discussion with when we have some ideas, proposition, or reciprocally. So this has been, I think, is the most important for us. Beyond the proof points is that we have networks of pharma that we know and that we can deliver services to, and that's really important for sales. Okay, so now the next slide is about the industrialization. So before Melody, we didn't have any large-scale deployment at OKIN and also in the world. So there are some important deployments in other areas and other verticals, but in healthcare there was nothing. And so with Melody, we were able to grow our pipeline, to grow our processes and how we work, to go to a certain scale of industrialization, which was necessary to carry out large projects. So we have large-scale implementation with a lot of different data sets. We have had an organization very delivery-oriented. So I don't know if this is IMI in general. I don't know if it's the influence of the Janssen project leaders, but we are very structured and very well organized, and this has helped us grow from a group of young startups who develop things in their garage onto something which can be deployed in real conditions with the requirements of pharma companies. And so this is also the last point. We've benefited from privacy and security audits by the IT departments of the 10 pharma companies, plus an external company called Cyrosec, which I highlight on the right here. And this has been tremendously helpful because we, like when your customers have a very high degree of security requirements, you need to get to this stage where we're simply not before. So we've grown a lot with Melody, especially on the industrialization. So on the last slide, maybe if I were to summarize one thing in the next slide, yeah. So overall, Melody helped us scale. So it helped us scale and take go from a small startup to a company able to deliver and to customers and have the level of requirements and professionalization which is needed. And importantly, it helped us scale first. We are now in a very good position with respect to the field of federated learning and the competition, in particular thanks to Melody, because we have this early proof point and we have all this early somehow adoption or vetting of the pharma partners, that what we are doing is the good way to experiment and to get to the original proof point that it makes sense to do federated learning. So overall, it has been very impactful and very beneficial to the company.
Great, thank you, Mathieu. It's great to hear how successful OKIN has been, through the Melody project and otherwise. And I know perhaps based on some of your experience that you're now participating in other IMI projects, like Andreas mentioned Optima, but I know there's others as well. So I'll invite the others to come back. Andreas, if you can turn your camera on. And I'll also invite the audience perhaps to submit any questions they may have in the chat so we can address them. While we wait for questions to come in, there have been some submitted already, and some submitted in advance. But I guess the first one I wanted to bring up, and I think you've all touched on this already in your presentations, is the exposure you get through an IMI project to different stakeholders. And I don't just mean the pharma partners here, I guess, but I also mean, obviously there's quite a lot of academics involved as well, but also we pride ourselves in trying to bring in other important stakeholders such as health technology assessment agencies, patient groups, and so on. And just wondering, could you maybe expand a little bit more on how you've learned from them? Have you got exposure to assets, data sets that you wouldn't normally have had access to through a normal collaboration? And I don't want to pick on people to go first, but Julia, perhaps it's been a while since we heard you, so if you could.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point, especially for us, the collaboration with the patient organization. That's something that we really value highly, and also something that helps us a lot in building what we build, right? So Radarbase, I think they're a good example for this, because this is actually something that really has a lot of impact on the lives of patients and can make a positive impact. So you can help them manage the disease, you can provide feedback on the data that you see, you can hopefully prevent if they go into relapses from the diseases that they have. So I think this is something that is really, really valuable, and I think this is something that also when we write a proposal for an IMI project, this is also one of the first things that we need to address, and that we want to make sure that we have patient organizations on board. And I think also it helps them to reach out to other patient organizations, right? So if you focus on a certain disease, you can say, okay, this helps for diabetes, but you can also go to a cardiovascular group of patients, for example, because you can just learn from each other, and also here the trust building is something that really helps. And I think for the regulatory things, I think the collaboration that we have in Eden is really one of the strongest there. So I think they are really highly involved there. They really put a lot of input in there, and also helps us a lot to really understand not only pharma but also the other stakeholders, because they are all important.
Thank you. Andreas, would you like to touch on that as well? I don't know if you have the same viewpoint.
Well, definitely, and I can expand a little bit on what Julia said, because especially if you're in a young organization, nobody knows you, and you are small by size, and you are weak on publication, if you like. It's much easier than to approach people like the patients organization, etc., and saying, here is a big consortium with all the reputation, and you are part of this, instead of you're coming as yet another SME. And then basically they say, well, what can you bring to the plate? So that certainly is a big add. And you are exposed, and Julia said this as well, to areas where you might not look at initially, like regulatory, like looking into what is health technology assessment, what are the aspects later on, so along the process pipeline. And you're understanding not only to look at a small spotlight, but actually looking at the full movie and not just at one picture of it. So it is really broadening if you're open. And then what brings that with it, if you're then in multiple projects or being seen as being a valuable partner, you can see the commonality between projects. Of course, every project has a specific goal, but let's say data sharing, that is a common problem still, if I'm allowed to say, across, because there are certain aspects which are either interpreted differently or not seen in the same way. So you can be a kind of an advocate also of smoothing issues which are brought up, but actually, not as problematic, because you do see the commonality much easier, because you're kind of a neutral in a way, if I'm allowed to say it for a second, but you're coming in as a kind of a partner, a trusted partner. So saying, hey guys, we saw that before. That was the solution which worked here. That was the solution which worked there. Maybe we can find a way, and we don't have to invent the wheel yet another 50,000 times.
Great, thanks, Andreas. And maybe, Matthew, I think you've spoken about this with reference to Melody quite a lot, but maybe you could bring in some of the other projects where OKIN is also working. I'm thinking in particular Big Picture, which is about pathology imaging and doing machine learning on that. And Optima, as already mentioned, real-world data for decision-making. What exposures are you getting in those particular projects, which would helping you as an organization?
So I think that being involved in IMI projects is a kind of stamp of quality already from the external eye for people who know what it entails. Especially being coordinator is a big overhead and responsibility, which I think gives us some credit to the people who are aware of this. It helps in different occasions. So we don't have direct interactions with patients' organizations, so I can't talk about that, but I can tell that from the media perspective, from the investor perspective, or even from the academic perspective of people reaching out to us because we are involved in a project, IMI project they've heard about, and so they like to do their master's thesis or have some interviews. There is a significant reach. Then in terms of new projects, it is true that they always, I mean, we first started with Melody, being coordinator, we're recognized as leaders in this area. And then other projects were much easier to enter, so not necessarily as coordinators, but we went into Optima, where Andreas is leading. We also went into Big Picture.
Your work package. Your work package, not the project.
Yeah, but at least the work package where we contribute. So basically these other projects are all a situation where we get new access to new partners, new contacts, which are always very helpful. And we try to bring, as Andrea said, a kind of unified added value to the project so that we can then organize things and work smoothly. And in each scenario, it brings us validation, external validation that what we are doing is not simply something that can be read in the journal, and that it is real life.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of questions in the chat, which are probably a bit more directed at Julia. So if the others don't mind, I'll refer to her, and in particular the Radarbase platform. So one of them is asking, can you do machine learning based on this? Can you integrate machine learning? And there's another question about what type of devices you can integrate into the Radarbase, in particular in vitro diagnostics or medical devices. And perhaps that's a question looking to the future under IHI, where this type of thing we'll hope to incorporate in our projects a bit more.
Yeah, really good question, and definitely something where we want to go to. So for now in the projects, the main point was on collecting high quality data, making sure it's standardized and everything, because we always had in mind, okay, people want to run algorithms on this, right? You collect those data because you want to have a predictive value, right? You want to be quicker than, you know, the doctor, and also help on preventing diseases. So that's definitely something that that is on the roadmap for Radarbase.
Great, okay. I'd like to expand this a bit more, because I think you mentioned that Radarbase is open source, which means anyone can go there, they can download it, they can start using it. And I think all three of you have a lot of you rely on open source solutions and so on. And again, so this question I raised at the very top of the webinar about how you can develop a business while still having open source solutions. How does that work? I mean, is it purely services? Maybe I'll ask Andreas first, and then Matthew, and then back to Julia.
Well, we are certainly the least software developers, if you like, but even if you're combining, if you're connecting existing solutions, you need to have some integrators, some connectors, whatever you want to call them. And then you have obviously the possibility to give it back into the open source and whatsoever. So there is certainly expertise in setting it up, maintenance, in connecting, and that's something where you can build on existing open source. But again, as ITTM is rather a service at this moment in time, I put that to Mathieu and Julia. But yes, I think you can build a business on open source. There are multiple examples on that.
Matthew, maybe.
So on our side, we build the core technology to do federated learning on an open source basis. And so the product itself that we build is, let's say, 90% open source. So it is true that it's not always easy to explain this, and to in particular to investors or people who are going to ask about the business questions. So the first line of answer is that Andreas gave somehow. I mean, customers are simply not going to use your open source solution, perform themselves the hardening from a security perspective, answer SLA, you know, when there is a problem and things like this. So there is a need for deployment in any case. And then the second is, where does the value come from in your application? Is it the software itself, or is it the data? In our expertise, it's more the data that creates the value. The software is a way to access it. And so basically, in our situation, people don't necessarily come just for the software of federated learning. They come because there is an existing network of partners who are using federated learning, and it's the network somehow that they want to join. And so when we have a new pharma interested in joining Melody, they are not going to ask anything about the software. They are saying, who is in, and who what are the data I'm going to access to? So the data won't be open source, that I can guarantee, but all the middle layer, I don't see a big reason why not. But then it's difficult. Open source is always difficult, because you, even on the development perspective, you have to have a private branch, a public branch, or have a policy to answer different feature updates by external people and so on. So it's not standard. We are happy to participate there, but it's a difficult matter, which I believe is not at the core of the value of what we create. So that makes it a little less complicated.
Thank you. And maybe Julia, if you have anything on that.
Yeah, I think there's not much that I can add, but definitely we're also trying to, you know, keep everything open source as much as possible. And also when we do projects, encourage everybody to share back with the community, also in the interest of the customers themselves, because there's always going to be a new development. And, you know, if you have your own branch and it's just that on the side, you will not be able to benefit also from new developments in the future. So I think it's quite an easy, an easy task to explain that to people. What's the benefit also for them.
Okay, I want to start talking a little bit about the federated approach that I think all of you have touched on, federated, including federated learning. But I guess before we go there, maybe just to touch on some of the data privacy concerns and some of the solutions offered, which maybe federated is one of them. And I think Matthieu's already emphasized how important that was for Melody. So maybe I'll go to Andreas first about, through the projects you're participating in, how do you handle data privacy concerns, especially when maybe you've got the same competitors in the same consortium?
Well, it's not necessarily only on the pharma side if you're talking competitors. It's actually also on the academic side. And thinking about clinical trials, obviously we are talking about personal data, so sensitive information, data you have which falls directly under the GDPR, just to name the elephant in the room, and which means in the past at least, and even today, I mentioned it already, you have a huge work to do in order to build good data sharing contracts, etc. And there is a lot of scare, I really call it this way, to lose control about information. You cannot get easily back. And then on top, obviously, we have the GDPR, there are patients' rights, and don't get me wrong, they're there for good reasons. Nevertheless, you have to work with this. So in the last years, it became at least one possibility to say, okay, the data doesn't leave the premises where they are generated, but the analysis code is traveling. And then obviously you have to have a common ground to be able to run the analysis in not only one space, but actually 5 or 10 or whatever. Now, this is a very nice, interesting concept, and I completely agree with Mathieu. It has to be proven that it's really working. And some of the mathematics we used to use when I was being educated doesn't work in a federated system because it expects that everything is being central. So there's also a bit of a learning along needed. But nevertheless, it really brings back the data protection aspect. You're not losing control, you are staying inside the legal remits, and that makes discussion much easier. But having said this, maybe it was initially the lawyers we were mostly facing when having these discussions, but now it might be IT systems, because then also you have to make sure that no data goes out, that the ports are being right there. So at this moment, I would say there's a lot of learning throughout in the community how and what actually interoperability should mean, in the sense of not being a buzzword. And for me, it's very exciting because I do see projects like we just named here multiple times, and I have no problems to say again, it might be an Eden, an Optima, a Melody, or whatever, Pioneer, where really these are groundbreaking projects, and we see on the way what comes out and how we actually deal with it reality-wise. So that for me is really breaking the old habits, breaking the walls, and making things really pragmatic and forward-looking. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional if I'm talking about interoperability. That is the passion.
Thank you, Andreas. That's fine. Now, Mathieu, so you when you went into Melody, you said you had this federated learning prototype, let's call it, which you developed. It was designed to work on health data rather than drug discovery data. Could you just talk a little about that and how that's being developed? And our Eden project is looking at a federated network of data sources. But you have a federated learning approach. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so I think to some extent these federated technologies are all going to converge to one layer, interoperable layer, where we can execute code in many different places under, I would say, a certain common privacy and governance standard and framework. So at OKIN, we started with federated learning. So training machine learning models, and especially for problems such as Melody, and some other partners, and I think Julia has shown that, have worked on building analytics where you can, for instance, follow how a population of a clinical trial is evolving or things like this. So these are different entry points, and which are, I think, going to converge to the same kind of technology. But I think we can separate here the technology itself and the applications. Since most of the analysis that we do are standardized from a mathematical perspective, we apply the same rough framework somehow. And given a little bit of flexibility, something applied to drug discovery can be applied to patient data or similarly. So I see the emergence and the need for consolidation at the European scale of a kind of interoperable framework where many different solutions can be plugged in and out. And then the field of applications are extremely numerous somehow, and it could be drug discovery, it could be I mean patient data, it could be like many different things. And we don't see here for us a bottleneck. It's just different. We don't see an obstacle between the two. It's just different markets that we are going to address with the same piece of technology that is not completely ready. I'm not going to sell that we have solved the interconnection between hospitals and pharma companies, but that is getting better and better, and toward which we are tending.
Thank you, Mathieu. And maybe for Julia, as it's been mentioned a couple of times now, the Hive is obviously one of the partners in our EDEN project. So perhaps the audience would like to hear a little bit about that. And I think in particular, the training of SMEs, which was brought up earlier on the webinar.
Yeah, sure. So what we're trying in EDEN, so EDEN stands for European Health Data and Evidence Network. So what we're trying to do is just build the infrastructure, build, the ecosystem so that European health data can be mapped to a certain standard, so that it allows then to run federated network studies. So exactly what Andreas explained. So you have the data in a certain format, and you can just send around the algorithms to analyze the data and then collect back the results, summarize them, and then you have the study results. And this is one of the projects I think that's really successful, because we're converting a lot of data to the standard. So there's a lot of growth in the records, the medical records of patients that we have converted. And also on the other hand, there's a lot of new parties that go into the OMOP conversion, because this is actually what we're really trying to achieve also when you look at sustainability, that you really want to make sure that not after the project everything ends, but that there's really an ecosystem of partners that can take it up and take it further in the future. And yeah, we as the Hive, we're one of the parties that trains the SMEs. So there's some sort of certificate. It's not like a paper with a stamp, but it's more like a training, and that you have to really show that you understand the OMOP model. So that's the standardized model underlying, but also the tools that you can use. And you have to go to some training, and then I think when you've gone through that, maybe Andreas can go into that a little bit further, then you can match with a lot of European health data organizations, hospital source data owners, and really can get started to also convert the data. So that's then part of the network, and can be used by different parties in the consortium, and later also just by the public to really run studies on real world data, on observational health data.
Thanks, Julia. And I should say that. Go ahead, Andreas.
Sorry, just said it. What I really like, and I would like to stress out, is it's not just saying we would like to harmonize data, but also giving a red line. How does it look like, and what should be one of the cornerstones? I think that was one of the aspects a long time was missing, because everybody was claiming we do data curation, but then you had 10 different flavors of the same thing, and not one common view on that. And even that, this training, you could say, but this is putting more competition into the field. Frankly speaking, there's so much data out there. Please get a bit more competition, because there's still a lot to do. And also what I really like with this is the concept of you're not having to change your own processes. You're adding a layer which enables you to go into this federated network. That means there is nothing being broken, or you don't have to build from scratch everything new. It is an additional step which is actually enabling a door opener in a lot of new avenues, doing federated learning, doing federated collaborative work. And that makes it also easy to explain to people. You don't have to change your underlying infrastructure completely. You are adding a layer which is actually opening up. Sorry, I couldn't resist to make that comment.
Thanks, Andreas. And I should say that ITTM is one of, I think, nearly 50 SMEs that have been trained by the EDEN project. So just demonstrating again how important some of our projects are. And if you are interested in that, I think they have an open, we spoke about open science before, there's an open training program for others who want to do that. And Julie, you mentioned sustainability, and that brings me on to perhaps my final question before we begin to start thinking of closing. So sustainability, obviously, from our point of view as a funder, it's crucial that the impacts of our projects are long felt. You know, that the results just don't finish at the end of the funding. We want to make sure that ideally the results feed all the way through to impacting on patient lives. Not always the case for all of our projects, but Mathieu, you mentioned again for you the idea of turning your partners into customers. Could you talk a little bit more about sustainability from your point of view and how you can guarantee that the outputs will be available long term?
Yes, so importantly, we are a startup coordinating the project. We need the sustainability. We are not here for the funding itself. I mean, that's good to be able to grow, but we are very much looking towards what's happening after. And so we are, I mean, I can't disclose exactly what's happening in the process because we are exactly discussing this right now, but it has always been very clear in the Melody project that the end goal would be to reach this sustainability situation where we, the public partners, offer a service to the pharma partners who are going to work on the service for fee approach. So that's so that has been very clear from the beginning, very simple, and now we are going to try to convert this. I think one of the things that we learned in the sustainability track, and maybe that was a trap, is the fact that we are training models across pharma companies. But what I mean, when would you've already done this collaboration, why would you need to do it a second time? And this is the difficult question that we have to address in the sustainability as a whole. Which we have good leads for this, but that's the main difficulty, to create incentive for the pharma partners to continue. And but at least the good point of having SME in the consortium is that the SME are going to go for it and try to make something out of it. So even if we don't succeed at this, we've really tried.
I guess, I mean, it was mentioned before, the fact that you've got the end users as part of the consortium, so you can phone them and say, is this what you want? What you want? Means you can really tailor what you're producing to those end users. Yeah.
Yes, very much.
Julia,
what I wanted to add, I think is also really important. I'm not sure if it's working all the time, but really to build a community of users and contributors. So I think this is really what we've seen for Radarbase. We really have to make sure that there are people that want to run studies with it, that are really interested in keeping the platform alive, that it really helps them. And I think if you make that valuable for people, then this is also something that really helps a lot with the sustainability, because there are always people that just continues with new study, they write their grant proposals about the platform, adding it in, and then this is just a way to keep it alive. So I think this is something that also during the project already you have to really put some time and effort into to make that really, to make a community really strong and alive.
Thanks, Julia. Andreas, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, really, again, extending on what both Julia and Mathieu said, it is really important that we are not generating just yet another database, yet another tool or platform, and every project is yet another. This is kind of wasted money, I have to say. It's my personal opinion. And if we really make sure that the data we are generating is being as valuable also later on, in a community effort, with all the security, again, this is high on the stake, but it is not a roadblock. If you do it correct, you can reuse the data. Elixir is one of the organizations who are doing that as well, but especially here in the life science, not only in the life sciences, but also in the healthcare environment, we can do much better than we did in the past. So, with these sustainability concepts, we discussed in the last couple of minutes, thinking of interoperable, making sure data is not dead just because the project doesn't get any funding anymore and the power plug is being pulled. That is something where we can still do better, but I think IMI and IHI will do a lot in order to get that forward. Having standards, having interoperability is one way there, but we have to live it as well.
Great, thanks, and thanks for thanks for mentioning Elixir as well as one of the perhaps sustainability infrastructures you could use. I'm reminded that one of the key flagship policies of the European Commission going forward is going to be the European Health Data Space. So we'd want all our projects perhaps direct at that as well. So as we approach the end, perhaps you could maybe give us an idea of looking to the future under IHI, where, as I said, we're expanding beyond just pharmaceuticals, going much further. Where do you think your organization could fit in? I don't know if you've had the chance to look at some of the draft calls are on our website, but maybe give an idea where you think your organization could fit into our future direction. And maybe I'll start with Matthew again.
Well, I don't know. We need to investigate this a bit more. I think it's. I welcome the opening from IMI to IHI. I think it makes sense, at least in our narrative at OKIN. Given the experience that we have, we will definitely be looking at more projects. But I want to make clear that our main goal is to convert Melody and our projects into businesses before we go and apply for a new call text. So I think the opportunistic approach where we are going to apply, if there is something where we can be really good at, is what we are going to apply, instead of trying to go for the next grant and next grant and next grant. This is good to create proof points, but we also need business proof points to be able to survive. So that would be my take.
Great to hear, Matthew. We want to see you being self-sustaining going forward. Okay, Julia?
Yeah, I think a little bit the same, but also what we're really trying to focus more is the patient centricity. I think that's something that's really one of the core points where we're gonna focus on. So for any calls that focus on this, there's definitely something that we want to do. But also in the meantime, we're just building on the side for Radarbase, so finding new projects and new customers and building up on this.
Great, thanks. And Andreas?
Yeah, again, same. And but this is a dream of myself, I don't want to do data curation in the future anymore. So if I'm also thinking patient data, etc., they should be from the very beginning by design, in the right way with the standards. If we are thinking streaming data, or we cannot afford having a data curation step in the end on top of it. So that's my dream. Let's see if I see this coming up. But we will certainly go, like I said in one of the slides I presented, this combination of the lessons learned from the data management and preclinical clinical studies towards the healthcare. There's a lot. This is really, for us as a company, a yin and a yang. We learn from each other, both areas, and this is where we are driving. So healthcare, definitely yes. Digital health, absolutely yes. But we don't forget the pharma side, certainly not.
Thanks, Andreas. And perhaps there is an opportunity under IHI to address your first point on getting the data in the correct format at the start, given that we've now expanded to include a lot of device manufacturers and so on, the people who would have the machines that generate that data. So we maybe keep an eye on the future. There's been one question which I want to address before we finish, which is practical tips from an SE point of view about how to find partners to enter future IHI calls. Without giving away your trade secrets, what would your advice be to other SMEs working in this space, perhaps, on how to identify the collaboration partners? Matthew, maybe?
Or maybe what I'm going to say is a bit polemical, but I would say go for quick applications. Don't spend a year doing applications. I mean, that's too much. Go for 2 months full time. Make some bets on your application, because as a SME, you are likely to be a bit, I would say, underdog in some situation. Yeah, I think, and yeah, I would say write. I mean, ask one person to be the owner of the document that you write, and not like many people write many different things. So that'd be my 3 tips: doing it quickly, and essentially having a good process for writing up, and being willing to make bets.
Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, I think also I think it helps if you're really passionate about the topic. So if it's really close to your heart, I think then you're also more willing to put in the work, because it's a lot of work. And when it comes to finding the right partners, I think it's just there are a lot of those events also where you can go to and meet people, because if you don't have this network, then you just have to start somewhere. Because I think if you have been part of a couple of those projects, with whom you can work together really well, then it's always easy. But if you really get started, I think you just have to build a network and find the people that are like-minded and really want to work the same way as you, and see the value in what you're proposing.
Great, thank you. And Andreas?
Yeah, from my point, it was the funny story that even if you're having a background in pharma, that doesn't help you in IMI project first. You have to have the academic consortium first, and then you're adding the pharma people. So like Julia said, and Mathieu, build the network, get something you're really having passion about, and then drive it forward. And don't let it go just because you once lost it.
Okay, great. So I think we'll wrap up there. We're just about finished for time. So first of all, let me thank all three speakers, Mathieu, Julia, and Andreas. It's really great, really enjoyable for me, your presentations. I just a couple of points before we finally finish. First of all, we mentioned the Eden project a couple of times there and their training. There is an open call for SMEs that Eden are now hosting. So if you're an SME who wants to work in that space, please go to the Eden website, that's ehden.eu, and you can apply for their call. I should also note there's another of our projects working in data management, Fair Plus. It's got an SME forum coming up on the 17th of May in Berlin. It's also available online, I think, so please go to Fair Plus for information on that. Please also look at our website for information on any upcoming calls. I think I've already mentioned there are going to be quite a lot in the data space. We will be hosting a brokerage event around the time the call is launched, which should be in June, I think. So to answer that last question about how to find collaboration partners, I'd highly recommend attending our brokerage event. And if you sign up to our newsletter, you will get information on that. So to finish, just to say that the recording and presentations will be made available on our website afterwards. And I just once again thank our speakers, thank the audience, thank a couple of colleagues I have here who've helped me out on this. So please repeat the domains. What I'll do is we'll put links to these particular, sorry, there's a question in the chat. We'll put links on our website to where these other opportunities are available. So thank you everyone else, and have a good day. Bye everyone.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.